Hello and welcome to this video on what should you do when a reviewer does not like your analytic approach. My name is Geiser. I'm an instructor and statistical consultant with QuantFish, and on this channel I present weekly statistics tutorials. I usually talk about multivariate statistics including structural equation modeling, factor analysis, multi-level analysis and latent class analysis. If this is something that interests you, then please subscribe to this channel. Also, don't forget to check out the description for additional resources, including a link to my free weekly statistics newsletter, as well as courses that I teach for QuantFish. In this video, I will not talk about a specific statistical approach, but I will instead address an issue that we frequently encounter when we submit work for publication to scientific journals, and that is that we have to deal with reviewers, and sometimes the reviewers may not like the analytic approach that we're taking in our studies. Specifically, they'll have something to say potentially about the statistics that we use, the quantitative approach, and they may not like what you did, or they may not understand what you did, and they may have something to say about it, or in the worst case, they may recommend rejection of your paper due to the statistical approach that they don't like. As an example, sometimes we have missing data, or oftentimes we have missing data in our data sets that we analyze, and there are different ways to address missing data, and so the reviewer may not like the approach that we took to address missing data. For example, we might have used multiple imputation or full information maximum likelihood estimation to include all available data points, and the reviewer may say, this is not okay, you should have used listwise deletion, and I'm not comfortable with you imputing the data. And then that would be clearly uninformed, because we should not discard data, and we should typically use all the available data. We should use modern missing data methods to address missing data, and so using multiple imputation or full information maximum likelihood estimation with missing data would almost certainly be better than listwise deletion in almost all cases. So in that case, the reviewer would not have a point, and so you would want to address this issue. In other situations, of course, the reviewer may have a point. So it's a possibility that there are better approaches out there that maybe you didn't think of, or that the reviewer didn't fully understand what you did, maybe because your description of the methods wasn't entirely clear. So there's also that possibility. So what should you do when you encounter this situation where a reviewer criticizes your quantitative approach, your statistical approach, and says this was not done right and I don't like this? So first of all, stay calm, because the reviewer may have a point and there may be some truth in what they say, and at the very least make sure that the way you described your analytic approach was clear enough that people can understand it, because that's often the problem, that they simply maybe did not fully understand what you did, and then that you need to be clearer in your description. So what I would first of all recommend is to set aside the reviews, wait a day or two, or maybe even a few days before you go back to your paper, and then after you have calmed down, after your initial arousal, maybe your initial anger about the reviewer has calmed down, revisit what the reviewer really said, revisit what you wrote in the paper, what you did in your analytic approach, and think about it. Try to be as objective and neutral as possible, and consider the possibility that you were wrong and that the reviewer is right, because that may definitely be the case. We all make mistakes, and we all know better now than we did 10 years ago about many analytic approaches, and there's a good chance in many cases that the reviewer has at least a little bit of a point that we should take into account. So try to take the reviewer's perspective and try to understand why they said what they said or what they wrote, and think about why they may think in this way, and maybe it has something to do with the way that you described your analytic approach in that paper. Now, this is one, possibility that actually you need to change something, either in the clarity of your description or maybe even in the analytic approach. And maybe really the reviewer has a point and there's an alternative way to do this, and that is potentially a better approach. And then if you can take that approach, then you should, if you can see if the reviewer, provides a backup in terms of backs up his points with references, and you see that, okay, reviewer has a point, I need to change something, then of course that would be a good thing to change your analytic approach accordingly if possible. Another possibility is that clearly the reviewer is wrong. You are right. So let's say we're going back to our missing data example. You used full information maximum likelihood estimation or multiple imputation. You are sure that you did it in the correct way or in a state-of-the-art way, that we should use these methods. And so you clearly have a point that your approach is better than listwise deletion. You don't want to use listwise deletion. You don't want to change your analysis because clearly what you did was better than what the reviewer recommended. So in that case, a good idea is to provide very solid literature references in your response to the reviewer that backs up what you did, where you can say, here's what we did and why, and the literature shows that this is the state of the art, this is how it should be done. So find the relevant, widely cited literature that is widely accepted in your field to convince the reviewer and the editor that your approach was more appropriate than what the reviewer suggests. And in many cases, then that will satisfy the reviewers if they see, oh yeah, there's all this literature that says this is what you should be doing right now analytically, and there's clear evidence that this is better than what I suggested. Then oftentimes they'll be silent and they will no longer raise this point and no longer argue about it in the next round of reviews, because clearly the literature shows that that's the better way to do it. Now, that's really important, because if you just simply argue with the reviewer without citing evidence, without backing it up with references, then the reviewer may be skeptical, may say, well, this is your opinion, but I still think that listwise deletion is better. Show me the references, show me the evidence that this is better. So that's a really important point, is to go into the literature, find solid literature, and then include that in your response to the reviewer. So that's definitely something that should convince the reviewers. Now, if it doesn't, and if the reviewers keep arguing and it looks like they will not accept what you did, even though you think that that's the right way to go, there's always the option to go to a different journal with your article. So sometimes it just doesn't make sense to argue with stubborn reviewers who clearly are wrong, and if the editor doesn't look like he or she's going to overrule that reviewer, then it may be less painful to just simply go to a different journal. In many fields, there are many different journals that you could submit work to. They are maybe not all the top journals in the field, but sometimes it just may make sense to just simply go and look for a different outlet for your work if it looks like it's too painful. You can, of course, also appeal a rejection of a paper if you clearly feel like this was unfair or based on reasons that didn't make sense. But in my opinion, in my experience, appeals rarely have success, because oftentimes the editors don't want to upset the reviewers. They have to work with the reviewers. They depend on reviewers to review papers, and so overruling a reviewer may upset that reviewer, and then the editor doesn't want to do that. Maybe they're friends with the reviewers, or those are good colleagues, and so they will often refrain from overruling a reviewer. And the editor themselves, they may not be sure about the issue, so they may not know enough to really take a stance and say, yeah, the author was right and you should use full information maximum likelihood and not listwise deletion. If the editors themselves, if they're unsure, then they may decide to stay on the safe side and go with what the reviewers said. So appealing something like that often doesn't make a lot of sense, and you just waste a lot of time and energy on something that may not be successful, and you could have used that time more productively submitting your work to a different journal. So that's oftentimes then a better option than to argue indefinitely with the reviewers or editors if they clearly are stubborn and they don't want to change their point of view. They are not convinced by the evidence that you provide that your approach was right. And so then a better way to deal with the issue maybe to just simply go to a different journal. Another option is or another thing that happens sometimes is that simply the reviewers do not understand the approach because it's so complex. So for example, maybe you use a complex structural equation model to address your research question, and the reviewers just simply don't understand what you did. They can't follow the analytic approach. They feel unsure about it, they feel uncomfortable about it because they don't know the method well enough. And so then in that situation, they may give you unintelligible comments simply because they don't understand your method that you used. And in that situation, one approach may be to simplify. So you could say, okay, maybe do I really need this complex structural equation model for addressing this research question, or would a simple multiple regression analysis or a simpler path analytic model not give me the same answer or essentially the same answer? And then maybe that would be a better choice to say, okay, let's simplify and not run into this methodological overkill situation, so to say, where the reviewers are totally distracted and made uncomfortable by a method that they do not understand. So sometimes simpler is better. If it gives you essentially the same answer to your research questions, then that is more important than applying a fancy method that gives you maybe slightly better results but is so complicated that the reviewers don't understand it and that they don't feel comfortable with it. So that's another tip to really rethink what you did. Are your methods maybe too complex or more complex than necessary given the research questions, and could you use a simpler approach that is more standard in the field, that reviewers and editors understand better and that they feel more comfortable evaluating? And always keep in mind that the reviewers most of the time they spend their time reviewing for free. So they do this as a service to the community. They do this, of course, also because they publish their own papers, so they also take advantage of reviewing. But overall, it's a lot of time that they spend reviewing many papers each year. They don't get paid extra to do this, and so they're spending their time reading your paper and thinking about it. And so you shouldn't get upset, so to say, too much about a reviewer, because what they're doing is basically volunteering, and many of them are trying to help you make your paper better. They come from a different perspective than your perspective oftentimes, and you just simply have to be patient a little bit with the reviewers too, because many of them really have good intentions. They're trying to help you make the work better. They're trying to be sure that what you did is right, that nothing gets out there into the published world that is incorrect or that has methodological flaws. And so always also give them the benefit of the doubt and think about the fact that they could be right and you could be wrong. I hope you found this video useful to learn more about how to deal with reviewers when they criticize your analytic approach. If you did, then please subscribe to this channel. Don't forget to check out the description for additional resources, and I'll see you next time.